Welcome to the fifth presentation for programming mobile devices. In this presentation, we're going to talk about how to set up the Android development environment. You've probably used an integrated development environment before, maybe NetBeans or Visual Studio, and they all serve very good purposes. Many years ago, NetBeans and Eclipse were considered kind of equivalents. Both are quite good, and I've used them very much, like both of them, for their own reasons. NetBeans took a bigger hold in the academic environment, and Eclipse took a bigger hold in the workforce. And that's fine. That works out very well. Prior to that, there were some attempts at some very simple IDEs that, like, was a Blue Jay, I think, and a couple others like that, that honestly were more confusing and misleading than need be. They tried to simplify things, but I think they went a bit too far. NetBeans is nice for people learning programming because it's very functional but not overcomplicated. Eclipse can do a whole lot more, but with all of those features, it's also more complicated and not really meant for beginners. Now, that being said, we're in a 400 level class now. We're not beginners anymore, and we're getting ready to enter the workforce. So one of the major objectives of this course is going to be learning Eclipse and learning how to use it well. I can tell you that most people who use Eclipse fall into one of two camps. They either hate it and it's a glorified notepad, or they love it because it makes them very productive. I used to be in the first camp. I used to not understand Eclipse well, and it was just a glorified notepad to me. The secret is to learn some good shortcuts, and that's going to be one of our big objectives this quarter. It goes along well with Android development, but it's usable outside of Android development. If you get a job after college that uses Eclipse, you'll be very happy if you have a little background in Eclipse. Okay, so to install Android, honestly, I can tell you how to do it, but so can they, and they're probably better at it than I am. So go to this URL, which just a moment, I have to re-find it. Okay, um, here we go. This is installing the SDK. It tells you everything you need to do. I have some screen captures of how I set it up, but to be honest, if I were you, I would just go to this page and follow these directions. So I'll go ahead and walk through them step by step. First, if you don't already have it, you want JDK version 1.6. I have a link here where you can download it. That's the Java Development Kit. You might well already have it, and there's an easy way to find out. One second. Okay. Make sure this works because I didn't try this one out before class. Here we go. Type in Java space, go open a command window, open Java space dash version. And if it returns something, you're probably in good shape. Although actually that won't tell you if you have a JDK, that will tell you if you have a JVM. In any case, you might just want to look on your file system and look for javac.exe. Make sure you have version 1.6. If not, then download it. If you've used NetBeans or Eclipse before, you probably already have it. If you have not, you probably don't have it, and it's probably a good idea to download it. Next, download Eclipse. I use 3.5. It's all Java, though. You could probably use just about any version as long as Android supports it. So to download Eclipse, you simply go to the link that I've provided here and download a zip file. What's neat about Eclipse is how it installs. While it is an executable, to install Eclipse, all you have to do is unzip it. That's it. So you get a zip file and unzip it. Now you do have to make sure you have the JDK installed first. You can install it later, just Eclipse won't work until you install it. You also have to make sure that you have a Java home set. That is an environment variable. And one moment, let me see if I can find mine. One second. Okay, I have to be cautious here because sometimes when I go to the file manager, the microphone stops working. One second. Okay, right click and okay, so I'm going to go to my computer. I'm going to right click and choose Properties. And yuck. Well, this isn't exactly what I wanted, actually. 1 second, please. Okay, sorry about that. I got a window I wasn't expecting. What you want to do then is click on Advanced System Settings, and there are several ways to get to this screen. You want to get to this screen, System Properties, Advanced, and then Environment Variables. Make sure that you have one called Java Home. Okay, and you see mine is set to C:\JDK 1.5.0 _ 11. It's just the location where your JDK is installed. That's what you want for that. I believe that's all we need to set here. I'm trying to remember if we had to set one for Android. I don't think we did. Anyway, you might want to double check that if you have some errors. Your Java Home might not be set. That could be a problem. Okay, next, download the Android SDK. You can develop Android outside of Eclipse, but it's kind of tricky. It's a lot easier inside Eclipse. The Eclipse integration is very good. And as an added bonus, it gives us hands-on experience with Eclipse, which is nice. So go to this link and download the Android SDK. And I believe, here we go. This is the link. There's the Android SDK. Get the one that's good for you, probably the installer if you're on Windows, and you're all set. Okay, now start Eclipse. So wherever you unzipped the zip file for Eclipse, there is a file called eclipse.exe, and I'll show you mine. I put mine under C programs. So if I look at my C drive, and I'm a bit expanded here, 1 second, C drive, and then program. Okay, you might have noticed there's a little gap in the sound there. For reasons I don't understand, when I bring up Windows Explorer in this Screencast-O-Matic, sometimes it shuts off the microphone. And I have to stop the recording, go back, replay it, and then stop it again to get the microphone to come back again. So I knew that was a risk. On the other hand, I did show where to get the Eclipse icon, so I wanted to go ahead and keep that there. So that's how we open Eclipse. Now, Eclipse is going to ask you for a workspace, which is where you want to store your project settings. Yeah, pick any workspace location that you choose where you have write access on your hard drive. Probably give it a name that you will remember. Okay. Next, we have to put Android into Eclipse. And one way to do that is with the automatic software update. Take this URL here and open up Eclipse. So copy this URL, open up Eclipse, and I'll show you on my actual Eclipse version here. If you go to Help, and then Install New Software, and then choose Add. Here's where you put that URL. Okay, here's where you put that URL. So one nice thing about Eclipse is that you can install third-party plugins for it. So this is Eclipse here. You can install third-party plugins for it to make it extensible. And you do it through this Help and then Install New Software feature, and then place the URL in there. So, whoops. So again, if the best bet here is to follow Android's instructions for how to do this on the site that I mentioned. This is how I set it up, but I set up my environment about 2 years ago. So there might well be a newer version than what I have, and if so, you're welcome to use that. Okay. Okay, and this walks step by step through that process. I've already installed mine, so I can't walk through that, but I did screen capture it so that you can follow what I have. This presentation, by the way, is in the, there's a zip folder with all the presentations for this course. When I originally wrote this course, the presentations weren't all complete, so I kind of updated them every week. Best bet is to get the one that's sitting under the week 8 in course documents. There's a zip file in there, and it has all of these presentations. Okay, one thing that's easy to forget to do, but you have to do it, is you have to, once you have Android installed within Eclipse, you have to tell Android in Eclipse where to find the SDK for Android. That probably doesn't make a lot of sense, but Eclipse knows about Java. It doesn't know about Android until we do the step we just finished, which is installing the new software. Now what we have to do is we have to link Eclipse and the Android SDK together. Okay. I'm not sure if I really made this clear earlier, but the Android SDK is something you have to download and install outside of Eclipse. That's step one. After you do that, you have to put a different software inside of Eclipse, and that's what we did through the help and then install new software. Now what we're going to do is we're going to link the two together. In Eclipse, once I've had the Android plugin installed, so there's the plugin in Eclipse and then there's the Android SDK. They're two slightly different things. We just need to tell them about each other. I go to Window Preferences, click on Android, and you see there's this thing called SDK Location. That is where on your hard drive you have installed the Android SDK. If you don't do this, you won't be able to start an Android project. You'll be able to go to File, New Android Project, but you can't get beyond that screen. So this is important to get beyond that screen. Okay, so steps again. Number one, make sure you have the JDK 1.6. If not, download and install it. Number two, download and install the Android SDK software. Number three, download and unzip Eclipse. Number four, once in Eclipse, go to Help and then install new software and put in the URL for the Android Eclipse plugin. Number five, I think I'm on number five, maybe number six, we need to tell the plugin about, we need to tell the Android plugin in Eclipse about the Android SDK. So when you install the SDK, write down where you've installed it. For me, I put it in C, Programs, Android, Android-SDK. So wherever you install it, the SDK, write that location down because you're going to need to set that here. Once again, Window Preferences, and then Android. That will give us access to things like the Android debugger. And the Android debugger is one of our best friends. Okay? Here's our SDK location. Again, I have screen captures in this presentation. This explains why we need the SDK location. After that, we can make a new project, and we'll take a look at this now. Okay? That's screen by screen how we go. So once I have Eclipse and Android both installed, one second, I'm going to try and... Eclipse has a lot of windows, so it's a little bit tricky to resize, but I'm going to try and go ahead and resize this one now, and we'll toggle back and forth. Once I have the Android SDK installed, and Java, and Eclipse, and the Android plugin, and then I've set my SDK path here. Once I've done that, I'll see File, New, Android Project. If we see this, we're in good shape. If you don't see this, chances are you have not properly installed the Android plugin. So if we see this, we're going to smile. Now I click here, and we get this screen that unfortunately is not going to fit within my screen capture. So I'll just scroll up and down as needed. Okay, we have to give our project a name. So we'll say Plant Places Mobile Summer Course. That way I'll know it's not the real Plant Places. Plant Places Mobile, you know what, do I want to call it that? Well, we'll go, you know what, we'll just call it, that's fine, we'll call it that. Okay, next I'm going to choose my target for the build, which is the 2.2 platform. That one's always worked well for me. Now, after that, I need to give my application a name. I'll call it again, Plant Places Mobile Summer Course. Package name, I'll say com.plantplaces, and create activity. Okay, wait a minute now. Package name. Remember that the package name, we're going to want to use multiple packages. In previous programming courses, you might not have done this. You might have put everything within one package. Here we're going to separate based on, is it a UI component, is it a business logic component, or is it persistence? Now, the package name that it wants here is the one for user interface. So I'm going to say com.plantplaces.ui actually. Now, activity. An activity is a Java class that represents a screen within Android. So this is what I'm going to use for my activity. Now, when I initially designed the real Plant Places application, I started with a welcome screen and log in and all this stuff. You think seriously about the screens that you want, because I eventually found out that screen was just worthless. Usually for me as an administrator, what I want to do is I want to start tagging GPS locations, and sometimes I don't have a whole lot of time, and with the limited screen size on the Android, I need to go in and do exactly what I want to do without any hesitation. Many times when I grab plant locations, I might be on a tour with a tour bus or something like that, and I don't have the leisure of just waiting as long as I can for the application to start. So I ended up switching the application so that the very first screen would be a location finder screen. So I'm going to create an activity and I'm going to call it location finder. Okay? All else looks good. Now, on this screen, if you can't select any build targets or you do not see build targets here, I can tell you what the error is. The error is when we set up that window preferences Android SDK location. That's the problem. You don't have that SDK location set up correctly. So let's think about this. If you can get to this screen, that means you have the plugin installed correctly in Eclipse. If you can get to this screen but you cannot select a build target, that means you have not told the plugin where the SDK is. Unfortunately, the error message doesn't say you need to specify an SDK. The error message just says you need to pick a target, and there are none that can be picked, so you can't get beyond this screen. If you can't even get to this screen, then probably you don't have the plugin installed correctly. So those are the different steps to look at. Once I'm happy with this, I'm going to choose Finish. And now I have a couple of other projects open in Eclipse, which you probably won't have yet. But as soon as I hit Finish, this project will create itself over in the Package Explorer in Eclipse. I'm going to resize Eclipse a little bit so that we can try to get a better view of what's going on here. So it creates this. This project here, and it creates a few folders that are going to be important to us. First, there's a folder called SRC, and it has the package I've specified with the activity that I've specified. That's where our Java code is going to go. That's where all of our Java classes that we write are going to go. They're going to go under the source file in whatever package name we specify. Android 2.2 has the Android libraries. Jen will come back to in a minute. Res has any resources, including layouts. Android really uses an XML-based layout system. And again, this is one problem I had with the last book I used to use. It didn't explain this well. One major reason to use Eclipse is it has a very nice screen editor for this. So when I say it's an XML-based layout system, that doesn't mean you have to go in and manually change XML. You can actually just click on this main.xml and it will bring it up. It will bring the screen up in an editor here, where you can just drag and drop components or widgets or views, as they call them, onto the screen. Makes life very nice for us. So, again, source contains all of our Java source files. Jen will come back to. Android contains the Android libraries. And then res contains resources. Resources like layouts and other XML files. One trick with resources is that in this version of Android, I understand it's changed in future versions, in this version of Android, all of our XML layout files have to be directly off of this layout folder. We can't have subfolders off of layout. They all have to be directly here. Okay. Values is where we put, say, we have a configuration file for strings. This is really, really important. I like the way Android did this. Prior to this, it was really easy to hard code string literals in your source code. That seems really nice when you're making a project in Cincinnati and just you and your friends are using it. But the problem is, as you get more and more successful, you're going to want to start appealing to a wider audience. And many times that audience doesn't speak the same language as you. I mentioned that I'm working in Mexico right now, and that's because I'm working with a product that is internationalization friendly. it can easily switch languages from English to another language, including Spanish. And one trick to doing that is not hard coding in string literals in your Java source code, but instead put the strings in a configuration file. Then you can have one version for English, one for Spanish, one for French, so on and so forth. And then as a user has a different language preference, you simply switch out that resource file on the fly. Works out very well. Next, we have the Android manifest, which is an XML configuration file that tells us how the program should run. It tells us some important things like what activities are in the program. And again, an activity is a Java class that represents a screen on the Android application. Usually, activities will work hand in hand with layouts. So you'll have an activity which defines all the logic when things happen, like buttons get clicked, and then you'll have an XML layout which defines where different components will go on your screen. Okay? So Android Manifest defines which activities can be used in your program. It also does things like define security requirements. So you can say my project must have network access, things like that. And it generally configures the application. Now, back to Gen, one of the things that Android has to do is it has to figure out how to take the widgets or the views that you put on the field, on the layout. It has to figure out how to put those into the activity. Okay, it has to figure out how to put those into the activity. A lot of what Android does is it will generate some constants that represent actual XML widgets. This gen file is where those constants go. That will make more sense once we actually start creating our Android app and start putting things onto the screen. Okay. Okay, what do we do next? The next thing to do is we want to run this in the simulator. And the way to do that is to create a debug profile. If you haven't figured out already, you definitely will figure out in this class that the debugger is your friend. It's something that you're going to want to learn. And because it's going to save you a lot of time. It's going to make life much easier on you if you understand how to use this debugger. In Android, you almost have to figure it out because unless you are going to purely debug on an actual Android device, you're going to want to run the simulator. As a matter of fact, if you do run on an Android device, you'll still need a simulator anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click down on this little bug here, and I'm going to choose Debug Configurations. Okay? And I come here, and I'm going to click the little paper with the plus, which means a new configuration. Okay? I have to select the project. I'm going to pick the project that I just created, the Plant Places Mobile Summer. Okay? Launch the default activity, that's fine. Everything else is good here. I'm going to go down, actually I'm sorry, let me go to Target. Okay, for Target, what we can do is part of that Android SDK that we installed includes an Android simulator. In other words, a piece of software that runs on your computer that simulates an Android phone. What we can do here is we can set up multiple simulators if we wish. There's a default simulator for Android 2.2. We'll go ahead and use that. A difference between Android and iPhone. With Android, you have a lot of different hardware manufacturers who might do certain things to customize the hardware itself. Maybe it'll be a different shape, or maybe it will have a keyboard or not a keyboard, so on and so forth. With iPhone, they're all alike. They're all identical. So you don't have any kind of tweaking you can do. You just make it for this one user interface, and there you go. So with Android, you get to choose what the interface is, what the hardware interface is, which means we have to test in a few more scenarios. So this is a default profile that we get with the SDK, but if we wish, we can make other debug profiles that will test other kinds of hardware, like different screen sizes, keyboard, no keyboard, so on and so forth. By having automatic selected, it will pick the most appropriate Android virtual device. If I were to plug in my phone, which I'll do in just a second, if I were to plug in my phone, we could also run it live on my phone, which I really, really like. That actually, they did a really nice integration there that makes it very easy to write an Android application, run it on your phone, see what it will be like. That's probably one of my favorite parts of how they did Android development. So, okay, we'll go ahead and say, pick this device. And now, again, it's a little tricky because I have limited screen space here. So I'm going to choose Apply, and then I'm going to choose Debug. Okay. What it's going to do now is take this quick and dirty Android program that I've run, and it's going to bring up an Android simulator. I can't fit the entire thing on one screen, so first of all, we're going to figure out how we can do that. Secondly, we're just going to go ahead and watch it start up. Okay, this will take a minute to start up, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and then unpause it once it's started. Trust me, the only thing I'm cutting out is exactly what you're looking at now. It's going to sit and flash like this for a little bit, and then the application will come up. And it's starting. Here we go. It's going to start. It will still take a moment, so I will start the recording again once it comes back. Okay, the application is live, and again, it's going to be a little bit tricky for me to show this all on one screen. For now, we're going to change it. But notice as soon as I slide the little lock across, it comes up and it shows my default activity. There's a lot more that we can add to this, but at the moment this will show my default activity. Now, when I run this on my laptop here, I can actually see the entire debugger. You can't because the screen capture software is only capturing part of my screen. When I run this at home, the debugger actually is larger than my resolution, and so even the title bar is too far for me to click. So I have to resize it. Let me show you a little trick to resizing this. I'm going to go ahead and close the debugger now by clicking on the X. Now I'm going to go back to Eclipse. I'm going to choose Debug Configurations, and here's where it gets tricky. Not really tricky, you just have to know the trick. I click on Target. It's not very obvious, but this screen can be expanded. If I go down to Additional Emulator Command Line Operations, I can pass some arguments to the emulator. So I'll say dash scale 0.75. What that means is make it 75% of the original size, or in other words, decrease the size by 70%, 75%. I choose Apply, and then I choose Debug, and let's take a look at the difference now. Once again, the emulator is going to come up, and now almost the whole thing fits on the screen. Not quite on my, I set the screen capture to be 800 by 500, sorry, 800 by 600. So not quite the whole thing fits, but almost. Good enough for us. So we'll go ahead again, and we will let this load. While it's loading, I'll talk a little bit about the project. At this point, if you're doing phase 1 of the individual programming assignment, you know enough to get started. The assignment says to use the user DTO and the package that I created, and then the two interfaces that I created. All you need to do is start an Android project, and like I say, you probably want a little dummy screen to at least test out your stub classes. I won't grade you on that dummy screen though. The UI that I will grade is what happens in phase 2. So this is just like any other project. You can right click here and you can choose new and then package, and then you can, if you wish, copy and paste the source files that I provided into your Android project. Then create the stubs that implement the interfaces, the iUser service stub and the user service stub that implements iUser service, and the user DAO stub that implements iUser DAO. So you simply need to create those two classes and then zip up the project and send it to me, and I'll grade it. To find out where the project is, right click, choose properties, and this will show you where Eclipse is storing the source code for your project. So you take that, zip up that folder, zip up this folder here and everything inside of it, and then just send that to me, and I will grade that, and anything that earns a 90 or better, I will zip up and make that available to the people doing the part 2. Okay, so here we are with our now smaller and easier to use, uh, our smaller and easier to use Android debugger, and there we have it. Hello World Location Finder. It's as easy as that. So dash scale will make this smaller or larger if you wish. So before long, we'll start actually adding some widgets to this screen. It's actually pretty straightforward. I have to say that Android is by far easier to learn than BlackBerry development. BlackBerry, I think they kind of had to rush to get something out the door to try to answer to iPhone, and they obviously had not worked out all the bugs. It was very painful to work with BlackBerry development, even though it was Java. Part of their process was that to get software to load properly, you had to pop the battery out of your phone and have it reset every time. It was just that should never be a requirement. The one thing I will say about BlackBerry, though, it was a more pure Java development environment. It had less platform-specific customizations. But nonetheless, both have their advantages and their disadvantages. Now, if I were to plug in my phone, it would give me the option to select my phone instead of this AVD emulator that we see here. And I could actually run this on my phone, fully featured on my phone. So that's quite nice. It's also an easy way to install the application on your phone, and then you can disconnect your phone and use the application. As a matter of fact, that's the only way I've ever done Plant Places Mobile. Plant Places Mobile is big enough. There's so much that I want to do with it that I kind of am just testing it with a small audience, that being me and the other people at Plant Places, before I make it public. So a lot of times I'll have some ideas, I'll go back and change some things in Plant Places Mobile and then load it on my phone and work from there. So, okay, I'm going to close the debugger. Our next video, we will talk about different parts of the view in Android, and we'll also talk about Scrum. So in this video, we covered the introductory Android project and setting up the Android development environment. We're all set. Thanks, and we'll see you for the next presentation.